The room was filled with the soft clinking of silverware and the smooth hum of jazz in the background. The ambience was refined, the lighting warm, casting a golden hue over the marble floors and polished wood accents. At a grand table, dressed in expensive suits and designer dresses, sat a group of wealthy individuals, their conversations a blend of tech deals and casual banter. In the center of it all, a young woman in a crisp red uniform moved gracefully between the tables. Her name was Maya, and though she walked with the poise of someone who had seen much more than she let on, she was just another waitress in the eyes of the people around her. Maya approached the table where the CEO of a tech giant, Richard Kesler, sat. His broad shoulders were relaxed against the back of his chair, his smirk wide and confident. He glanced at Maya for a moment, clearly uninterested in her presence. As she neared, his voice, dripping with condescension, rang out. "Do you even know what we're talking about?" he sneered, his eyes narrowing at her. The others at the table chuckled lightly, but their amusement wasn't kind. It was that of superiority. Richard's tone wasn't just dismissive, it was a statement. This woman, standing in front of them, wasn't important enough to understand their conversation. Maya paused for a brief second, her calm gaze never faltering. Then with a smooth motion, she placed down the wine glass in front of the CEO. She remained silent as his words lingered in the air, their sting sharp and clear. He turned to his colleagues, ready to continue his conversation, no longer acknowledging her. Yet, Maya did not move, and neither did the room. The air seemed to thicken, the moment frozen in time. "Can she even speak English properly?" A voice from the other side of the table piped up, questioning her even further. Maya's hands were steady as she cleared the empty plates from the table, but her mind was calculating, her resolve building silently with every sneer and every snide remark that was thrown her way. This was not the first time she had faced disrespect, but something about this moment was different. She could feel the weight of the room's expectations, their assumptions about her, their idea of what she was capable of. But she wouldn't let them define her. Not today. Inevitably, the evening progressed, and with each passing minute, the conversation at the table became more animated. Richard Kesler and his colleagues reveled in their own importance, discussing high-tech acquisitions and future investments as if the world revolved around their deals. Maya continued her rounds, gracefully refilling wine glasses, her movements precise and unobtrusive. But with every passing comment, the pressure inside her grew. The insults, veiled and open, began to wear on her, each remark a reminder of the world's narrow view of her. As Richard leaned back in his chair, stretching his arms wide in an exaggerated gesture, he glanced at Maya with a smug smile. "I bet she doesn't even know what's happening in the world of artificial intelligence. It must be such a struggle for her," he chuckled, looking around for confirmation from his peers. The others joined in, laughing in a manner that could only be described as condescending. Maya was well aware of the game they were playing, the unspoken assumptions they made about her intelligence, her background, and her ability to comprehend anything beyond simple tasks. The words stung, but she didn't flinch. She had learned long ago that silence could be more powerful than any spoken word, especially when it was used with purpose. But that night, the silence was building up, not just as a shield, but as a weapon. A moment came, however, when Maya had had enough. She was passing by the table again, and as she reached to refill Richard's glass, he leaned forward with a smirk, ready to drop yet another dismissive remark. "What do you even understand about a global merger?" he sneered. "You probably think this is all just about making more money, right?" The laughter around the table erupted once more. But then, as if the weight of the world had shifted, Maya spoke, her voice calm but clear. "I understand more than you think." Richard stopped mid-sentence, his smile faltering. The room seemed to pause for a moment. It wasn't just the unexpected nature of her response that made everyone stop. It was the tone. There was no anger in her voice, no defensive edge, just a quiet confidence that demanded attention. Maya didn't wait for anyone to respond. Instead, she stood still for a moment, her eyes meeting Richard's, unflinching. "I understand the numbers. I understand the risks. And I understand what happens when people overlook others because of where they come from or how they look." Her words hung in the air, and for the first time that evening, Richard's usual confidence wavered. The table fell silent. Not because of an uncomfortable pause, but because they all realized something. They had underestimated her, and she had just turned the tables with nothing but a few simple words. Maya didn't need to elaborate. She had made her point, and she made it with grace. As she turned and walked away, the weight of the room's expectations shifted, and the power dynamics began to shift with it. They all watched her leave, their thoughts suddenly occupied with the realization that she was no ordinary waitress. She had said what needed to be said, without raising her voice, without creating a scene. She had simply spoken the truth. And in that moment, she became something far more than what they had ever imagined her to be. The silence in the room was deafening. Richard Kesler, the CEO, sat frozen in his chair, his previous smirk replaced by a look of confusion and disbelief. For a brief moment, he was lost for words, something that rarely ever happened to him. The room seemed to hold its breath, and all eyes shifted from Maya to him, awaiting his response. Richard had always been in control, a man who commanded respect with nothing more than his presence. But now he was the one who was being judged. Maya had spoken, but it wasn't just the words that had left him stunned. It was the calm confidence with which she had said them. As the awkward silence dragged on, Richard cleared his throat and leaned back in his chair. His fingers drummed lightly on the armrest, as if he was trying to process what had just happened. "Well, that was unexpected," he muttered, trying to regain his composure. The rest of the table shifted uneasily, unsure of how to react. Some exchanged glances, but no one dared to speak. The discomfort was palpable. Maya, however, remained unfazed. She wasn't seeking validation from anyone at that table. Her purpose was clear. She had made her point, and now it was up to them to decide how to deal with it. Without a word, she turned and walked back to the kitchen, her movements steady and deliberate. It was as if she had just dropped a bomb in the middle of the room and now was leaving them to pick up the pieces. The moment was surreal. Richard watched her go, his mind racing. It wasn't just that she had responded in a way he hadn't expected. It was the fact that she had spoken with such authority, as though she had nothing to prove. She had turned the tables with nothing more than a few simple words. He had dismissed her without a second thought, assuming she was just another part of the service staff. But now, he realized, he had underestimated her in the worst possible way. It wasn't just the languages that had shocked him. It was the recognition that she was far more than the stereotype he had constructed in his mind. The tables had turned, and Maya had won. Richard had lost control, and for the first time in years, he was faced with the uncomfortable reality that he might not be the smartest person in the room. For the rest of the evening, he couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. Every time his mind returned to Maya, it wasn't her words that lingered. It was the way she had carried herself. Her quiet strength had made him question everything he thought he knew about people like her. He had spent his life building an empire on the belief that people like him were superior, that their education, their wealth, and their status gave them the right to look down on those who were less fortunate. But Maya had just shattered that illusion in an instant. The rest of the evening went by in a blur for Richard. No matter how hard he tried to focus on his business dealings, his thoughts kept drifting back to the woman he had so casually disrespected. As the night drew to a close, the weight of the moment finally hit him. He had been humbled in a way he never anticipated. And as he looked around the table, he could see that the others were thinking the same thing. Maya had exposed their ignorance, and they all knew it. As he left the restaurant that night, Richard Kesler couldn't shake the feeling that something inside him had shifted. He had always prided himself on his ability to control a room, but now, he was left with the unsettling realization that sometimes true power lay in the most unexpected places. Long after the laughter had faded and the plates had been cleared, the weight of the evening still lingered in the air. In the kitchen, the soft hum of the dishwasher and the clatter of utensils filled the space. Maya stood by the counter, her hands steady as she stacked clean glasses, her mind still replaying every moment that had unfolded. She had not planned to speak up that night. For years, she had learned to swallow the sting of casual insults and quiet prejudice, to keep her head down and survive one day at a time. But something about the way Richard Kesler had looked at her, the way he had spoken as if her mind were invisible, had struck a nerve she could no longer ignore. She had grown up watching her mother work double shifts in restaurants just like this one, always polite, always composed, even when people treated her like she did not exist. Her mother had taught her that dignity was not given, it was chosen. And tonight, Maya had chosen it for herself. In the dining room, Richard sat alone now, the other guests having left one by one. The faint jazz music still played, but it sounded hollow, like an echo of the night's arrogance. He stared into his untouched glass of wine, seeing nothing but his own reflection. The confident smirk he wore so easily in meetings was gone. For the first time, he found himself questioning his own behavior, his own words. He had built his entire empire on logic and intellect, but tonight, one simple truth had unraveled it all. Intelligence without humility meant nothing. He had mocked her, not out of malice, but out of habit, and that realization stung deeper than he expected. Somewhere between the laughter and the silence, he had realized how blind he had been. Meanwhile, Maya took a deep breath and stepped outside into the cool night air. The street was quiet, the glow from the restaurant windows spilling softly onto the sidewalk. She looked up at the sky, exhaling a long sigh of release. For the first time in a long while, she did not feel small. She did not feel invisible. She felt seen, not because of how loudly she spoke, but because of what she chose to say. A few minutes later, the sound of footsteps echoed behind her. It was Richard. He hesitated at the doorway, unsure how to approach her. For a man who had negotiated billion-dollar deals and spoken in front of thousands, this was uncharted territory. "Maya," he said quietly, his voice stripped of its usual command. She turned, her expression calm but unreadable. He hesitated again before speaking. "I owe you an apology. What I said earlier was wrong." His voice carried sincerity, and though the words came awkwardly, they were real. Maya looked at him for a long moment before answering. "You don't owe me an apology, Mr. Kesler. You just needed to see." He blinked, unsure what she meant. "See what?" She smiled softly. "That respect isn't a gift you hand down. It's something you choose to give freely." Her words landed gently, but they struck deep. Richard nodded slowly, unable to find the right words in return. He had spent his life studying data, building systems, and analyzing numbers. Yet, in that moment, he realized that true intelligence wasn't measured in degrees or profits, but in empathy. Maya turned back toward the street, her steps light, her posture strong. Richard watched her go, knowing this night would stay with him longer than any business victory. Behind her, the restaurant lights dimmed, and for the first time, the silence felt peaceful, not heavy. In a world obsessed with power, she had reminded him that grace could be louder than arrogance, and wisdom could come from the most unexpected voices. The following morning, sunlight poured through the wide glass windows of the restaurant, bouncing off the polished tables and gleaming silverware. The atmosphere that had once felt heavy with arrogance now carried a strange stillness. Staff whispered softly to one another, replaying what they had seen the night before. Everyone had heard about it by now. The waitress who spoke to the CEO in 5 languages. The story had spread faster than spilled wine, from the kitchen to the hotel lobby, and even to the guests who dined there often. Maya arrived quietly, as she always did, her uniform pressed, her hair neatly tied back. But today felt different. She could feel the weight of eyes on her, curiosity mixed with admiration. She had not come for attention. She came because work was still work, and dignity, to her, meant consistency. As she checked the setup for the lunch service, she overheard 2 servers whispering near the counter. "Did you see her?" She switched from French to Japanese like it was nothing, one said in disbelief. The other replied softly, "I heard she studied languages in college but had to drop out. Family reasons, maybe." Nobody knew. Maya smiled faintly to herself. People were finally talking, not about what she wore or how she looked, but about what she knew. She never bragged about her education. It was a part of her past she kept quiet about. Life had taken her away from classrooms and toward survival. Yet, even when she worked long shifts and counted tips at midnight, she kept studying. Languages were her way of staying connected to the world, a reminder that her mind was bigger than the box others tried to keep her in. In another corner of the restaurant, Richard Kesler sat alone again, this time without his entourage. He had returned, not for business, but for something harder to define. When Maya noticed him, her steps slowed for just a moment. He looked different today. No tailored arrogance, no sharp commands. Just a man with questions. She approached with quiet professionalism. "Good morning, Mr. Kesler." "May I bring you some coffee?" she asked, her tone neutral but polite. He nodded, his voice lower than before. "Yes, please. Black." As she poured his coffee, he spoke again. "I read about you," he said, his eyes following her movements. 5 languages. Is that true? Maya paused briefly, then smiled lightly. 6, actually. But who's counting? Her response was simple, but her tone carried humor and grace. Richard exhaled slowly, a small smile forming for the first time in days. "I owe you more than an apology," he said. "Last night made me realize something about myself. I thought intelligence came from power or position. I was wrong." Maya listened silently. There was no need to respond. His humility spoke louder than his words. "Would you ever consider working for me?" he asked suddenly. "Not as a waitress, but as a cultural consultant for my company. We work internationally. Someone like you could help us bridge worlds better than anyone I know." Maya blinked, surprised. For a moment, she didn't know how to respond. It was an unexpected offer, one that could change her life. Yet, in her heart, she knew her decision was not about the opportunity, it was about meaning. She placed the coffee pot down gently and met his eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Kesler. But I think I'm exactly where I need to be right now." Her answer was not rejection. It was peace. Richard nodded slowly, understanding. Some lessons, he realized, were not meant to be turned into transactions. They were meant to be carried. As Maya walked away, he watched her with quiet respect. Around them, the restaurant buzzed with life again, but the air felt different, lighter, more human. That morning, both of them learned the same truth in different ways. Sometimes, the most brilliant minds are the ones who never needed a spotlight to shine. The next few days seemed to move with a different rhythm at the restaurant. Maya noticed the shift immediately. People who had once passed her by without a second glance were now stopping to greet her with a new kind of respect. Her colleagues, who had once whispered behind her back, now looked at her with admiration. She hadn't asked for any of it, yet it was clear that something had changed. It wasn't just the language skills or the fact that she had embarrassed the CEO. It was the way she had commanded respect, not by shouting or demanding, but by standing her ground in the face of casual disrespect. Maya had never thought much about what she did. She wasn't there for fame or accolades. She worked because it was the right thing to do. She worked because she had dreams, dreams that sometimes felt too far out of reach, but dreams nonetheless. That night, she was walking across the dining area when she saw Richard Kesler sitting at the same table where everything had changed. He wasn't alone this time. He had brought a colleague with him, and he smiled at Maya as she passed by. "Maya, join us for a moment," he said, his voice different, kinder, warmer. Maya hesitated, but there was no reason not to. She had nothing to prove. She walked over and pulled up a chair. Richard's colleague, a younger man in a sharp suit, looked at her curiously. "This is Maya," Richard said. "The person who opened my eyes." Maya smiled politely. "I'm just someone who does my job," she said, her tone light. "I think we can all do our jobs better when we treat others with respect." Richard's colleague nodded, clearly impressed. The conversation shifted quickly to business, but Maya found herself listening closely. It wasn't about her anymore. It wasn't about the languages or the public apology. It was about the message she had conveyed that night. "I've been thinking," Richard said, leaning forward, his hands clasped in front of him. "The way I've built my company has always been about control, about power. But I've realized that it's not just the numbers or the tech that drive success. It's the people behind it all. People like you." Maya looked at him, surprised. "You're giving me credit for that?" she asked, her voice gentle. "I'm not giving you credit. I'm learning something." He paused for a moment, then added, "I was wrong to dismiss you. I've been wrong about a lot of people, actually." He turned to his colleague, who was now looking at him intently. "And that's what needs to change, how we view people, not just what they do. Everyone brings something to the table. Maya's lesson isn't just for me, it's for all of us." Maya didn't know how to respond. She wasn't looking for an apology. She wasn't looking for acknowledgement. But in that moment, she realized that what had begun as a simple act of self-respect had turned into something much larger. It wasn't just about the moment of turning the tables on Richard Kesler. It was about showing everyone that we all have something valuable to offer, regardless of how the world might try to define us. As she stood up to leave, Richard stopped her. "You've given me more than just insight," he said. "You've reminded me that success isn't just about being at the top. It's about how we treat others along the way. And that's something I need to work on. Maya nodded, a smile playing at the corner of her lips. We all do, she replied. As she walked back to the kitchen, she couldn't help but feel a sense of pride, not because of the impact she had made on Richard, but because she had finally embraced her worth, just as she was. It had been a long time coming, but she had learned something important. The world would never define her. She would define herself. The days following Maya's quiet exchange with Richard were filled with change, not just for her, but for the entire restaurant. Word had spread quickly through the staff that the waitress who had once been invisible in the eyes of the elite was now a topic of conversation in boardrooms and at dinner parties. The shifts were subtle at first, but they grew. Guests began treating Maya with a different kind of respect, not because she had proven herself to them, but because she had reminded them of something they had forgotten, that everyone has worth, regardless of their job or appearance. Maya never let the newfound attention distract her. She kept her head down, focusing on her work as always. But now, as she moved through the restaurant, there was a new energy in the air. It was as if the space itself had been infused with a sense of respect that hadn't been there before. One evening, after the dinner rush, Maya found herself standing by the kitchen door, looking out at the street through the rain-smeared windows. It was late, the streets were quiet, and the restaurant was nearly empty. As she stood there, lost in thought, she heard footsteps behind her. Turning, she saw Richard walking towards her, a serious look on his face. Maya, he said, his voice carrying the weight of something important. I've been thinking. She raised an eyebrow, waiting for him to continue. I don't want this to be just a lesson for me, he said. I want to make it right. I want to give you an opportunity, one that you deserve. Maya's curiosity piqued, but she remained silent, unsure of where this conversation was headed. Richard continued, his voice steady but filled with sincerity. I've been talking to the people at my company, and we want to offer you a position. Not as a waitress, but as a consultant. You've shown me that the true value of a business lies in how we treat people and how we view the world. I want you to help us with that. Help us understand the perspectives that we've overlooked. Maya blinked, processing his words. She had never expected this. It wasn't the kind of offer she had ever thought would come her way. Why me? She asked, her voice calm, though a part of her was surprised. Because you see things differently, Richard replied. You've shown me a new way of thinking. I don't want to miss that opportunity. Maya felt the weight of his words settle in her chest. She had spent so long trying to prove her worth to others, trying to be seen for who she was, and now, for the first time, someone was recognizing her without her having to ask. It was overwhelming, in a way, but also freeing. She didn't have to chase validation anymore. It had come to her. After a long moment, Maya finally spoke. I appreciate the offer, Richard, but I don't think that's the right path for me. He frowned slightly, confused. You're turning it down? It's not that, she said with a soft smile. It's just that I've learned something in the past few days. I don't need a title or a job to prove my value. I've already got everything I need. Richard was silent for a moment, clearly processing her response. Maya could see that he understood, though he was still digesting the lesson she had taught him. She looked at him and added, I'm happy where I am. And I'm content knowing that I don't have to change who I am to succeed. Richard nodded slowly, a thoughtful expression on his face. I respect that, he said quietly. But just know, if you ever change your mind, the offer still stands. Maya smiled, her eyes full of gratitude. Thank you, Richard. But for now, I'm exactly where I need to be. As Richard left the restaurant, Maya returned to her work, her heart light and her thoughts clear. She didn't need to be anything other than herself. She had already learned that the greatest gift she could give the world was simply to be authentic, to stand firm in who she was, and to never let anyone make her feel small again. Days passed, and the rhythm of the restaurant continued, but something had changed, both for Maya and for everyone around her. The small acts of kindness and respect had grown into something more. Maya's presence was no longer just a part of the background. It was noticed, valued, and appreciated. The quiet dignity she carried with her every day had begun to transform the very environment she worked in. One evening, as the last of the guests trickled out and the staff began cleaning up, Maya stood at the door, looking out into the quiet streets. The night air was cool, and the city lights shimmered softly in the distance. She had always been content with her life, with the work she did, but now, for the first time, she realized just how much power there was in simply being herself. The transformation wasn't just in the people around her, but in the way she viewed herself. She wasn't invisible anymore. She didn't need validation from anyone. She had found strength in quiet confidence, in choosing her own path without fear of what others might think. Richard Kesler had been right about one thing. Success didn't just come from power or prestige. It came from being true to who you were, no matter where you came from. That night, as Maya finished her shift and prepared to leave, she noticed a small package waiting for her on the counter. It was neatly wrapped, with a simple card attached. She opened it slowly, revealing a set of plane tickets to Paris. The card read, "For your journey. You've earned it." It was from Richard. He had kept his word, even without expecting anything in return. Maya smiled, a small tear slipping down her cheek. Not because of the gift, but because for the first time in her life, she knew her worth wasn't defined by anyone else. It was her own. As she walked out into the quiet streets, Maya felt a sense of peace she had never known. She was free, not because of the opportunities that might come her way, but because she had finally embraced who she was, unapologetically and completely. And that, she knew, was the greatest freedom of all. Months later, Maya found herself sitting at a small cafe in Paris, sipping a cappuccino as she looked out at the bustling streets. The city was alive with energy, a place where people walked with purpose, their lives unfolding in the rhythm of the city's heartbeat. Maya had always dreamed of being here, of experiencing a world far beyond the walls of the restaurant where she had spent so many years. But now, as she sat in the cafe, she realized that the dream wasn't about the destination. It was about the journey that had led her here. She wasn't just here because of a ticket Richard had given her. She was here because she had found her own worth, her own strength. She had learned that success wasn't about being the loudest in the room or seeking validation from others. It was about standing firm in your own truth, no matter what the world around you believed. Maya smiled to herself, a sense of contentment settling over her. She didn't need anything else to feel complete. She had proven that her value wasn't defined by anyone else's standards. It was hers to claim. As she took another sip of her coffee, a familiar feeling washed over her. The same feeling she had experienced when she first stood up to Richard Kesler. The feeling that her voice, her presence, her story mattered. And it always would, no matter where life took her next.